Hello there, everybody, and welcome back to Andor Predictions and Speculation. This is our predictions and speculation towards Andor Season 2. If you've not checked out our review of Andor Episode 12, the finale, Rick's Road, check that out. It is up on the channel now. Came out on Wednesday. Make sure you hear our thoughts on the finale before we dive into here in this video what we think will happen in season two. Season two is going to be structured completely differently than this season. It's going to be a really interesting juxtaposition with this season one, which really is surprisingly connected to season two far more than I think we all anticipated with this type of structure that season two is going to hold. So we're going to dive into all of that. But before we do so, please hit that like button down below and subscribe to our channel for continued Star Wars content. Your subscriptions are the best way to show us that you support our channel. We try to give you guys the best Star Wars content on the internet, so make sure you're subscribing to show your support for us and to show that you want to see more of our stuff here in the future. Comment below, let us know what you think is going to happen in Andor Season 2. There's a ton to speculate on here. Obviously, what we're predicting to be another 12 episode season with a ton of storylines and a lot of time jumping. So there's a lot to predict, and obviously none of us are going to be completely right. So let us know your thoughts down below. If you haven't checked out our review of the High Republic Convergence, it also went up on Monday. It is the latest book in the High Republic, the first adult novel in the High Republic Phase 2. And if you want to hear our non-spoiler thoughts on that, check that video out. It is up on the channel now. Next week, we will be returning to our 2-video week format, our Tuesday, Friday format for our channel. And we will be launching that with the History of the Star Wars Franchise Part 4. That is coming out on Tuesday. I know a lot of you have been asking for it for a long time. It's finally coming out, so make sure to check that out on Tuesday when it drops. All right, let us get into Andor Season 2 predictions and speculation. There's obviously a ton to talk about here after what the finale ended like, and with how few storylines completely wrapped up in the finale, and the fact that we got basically no deaths for any of our central characters in the show. No one died. Literally no one died. So we have everyone to talk about here for next season. We also have the elephant in the room of the time jump. Tony Gilroy has been very specific about the show. He has said that it will cover the remaining 4 years leading up from Andor Season 1 all the way to Rogue One, which obviously starts right before A New Hope, with Cassian on the Ring of Catherine killing a rebel spy who has information about the Death Star. We do get the end credit scene teased of the Death Star at the end of this episode of episode 12. So if you haven't seen that, make sure you fast forward to all the way past all the credits. Then you can see the Death Star scene. But apparently that's going to play a big role in season 2 as well. But we're going to divide this speculation into a couple more manageable parts. We're going to first here talk about the Rebels, which is basically all of our good guy characters that we've seen so far in this show. We assume they'll be a part of some form of rebellion at some point here in season 2. Then we'll talk about the Empire, which has been dominated by the ISB, but also what Cyril's role might be. And then let's get into those more specific Rogue One connections, those connections that have kind of been announced already with somebody like K2SO, but have yet to grace the screen so far. So with all that preamble out of the way, Sanak, what are your thoughts on some of the things that we might see our good guys do in next season?
Well, our good guys are gonna become even more complicated. That's for sure. We definitely have to see a lot of like the structure of the rebellion begin, and that's where someone like Luthen will definitely be tasked with. Maybe more Clea because she is a little bit more of like his guy who's a little bit more organized and seems to keep his secrets for him and is essentially running the business whenever he's off running around, grabbing one artifact, causing 5 rebel cells to appear someone else, right? So I could see her be her role, and that interchange could continue to evolve and change and grow. I'd love to see like Luthen kind of get a bit of a pushback from his closest partner there too. Um, they've already had some conflict about him slipping, and he did promise to Clea essentially that he would get rid of Cassian. So I'd love for her to be directly opposed to Cassian and have have them sort of be like adopted mother father kind of fighting over a kid, right? Or like a divorced parent sort of situation. I feel like that would be a pretty interesting dynamic with Cassian as he learns to be like a real rebel. Um, and I think we could see Luthen also bring in a lot of like-minded people, like a Draven, right? We could see a lot of those sort of characters, and then we could see kind of Cassian's following, um, all the people that he comes to Scarif with. I kind of want to see a lot of those characters uh, be selected partly by the influence of the people that Luthen brings in and who Luthen wants. Maybe because Clay doesn't like this person, he specifically brings in that person. I'd love to see how, even if they're all on the same page, their biases, their desires, the way they want things to play out, and how each thing outburst or comment or action affects each other. I think that'd be a pretty cool pyramid, triangle there. And then, of course, there's the Mon Mothma factor. She's still going to be on Coruscant before the Gorman massacre stuff happens. I think we're going to see a lot more buildup. Um, I I don't know. It's a little bit of a trickier one for her because, like we said with her episode 12 review, she has been disconnected the entire first season. Only Luthen has been her point of contact for everything that's been going on with Cassian and what Luthen's been doing. And she has to become the person that we see in Rogue One in the same room with Cassian, where even if they don't see eye to eye, there is a level of respect to be able to share the same space and not feel like there's a strange energy or weirdness between them. So I'd like to see her kind of probe into Cassian, try to give him some sort of ideals to work for, to look at, strive for. I'd like to see the reality of what he has to do for Draven or Luthen fly in the face of everything that Mon Mothma stands for, or you know, teaches him and makes him value. I think that'd be a pretty interesting connection. Having her be like the cool aunt, the person who's pulling into this strange dynamic that he's been with how season one ends with everyone alive. He's now in a sort of family structure, I would think, moving forward with this early rebellion. And then as far as Mon Mothma goes, I think her family stuff is going to be dissolved pretty quickly. I think Perrin and her daughter go back to Chandrila with her daughter's marriage. Maybe they get a little bit of back and forth, maybe some visits and stuff like that. But I think the isolation of her from her family is going to be something that could happen pretty quickly. So we see her becoming a bit more focused on politics as a result. And then the Gorman massacre, oh no, that buildup starts happening. And then we run into the biggest elephant in the room, I think, for her is that she's in Star Wars Rebels. Her announcement to the galaxy is in an animated show. I don't know if necessarily Tony Gilroy wants to bring Freddie Prinze Jr. as Kanan and whoever else and have them all be seen in one shot with Mon Mothma as the ships are connected. I don't see them recreating that scene, but definitely see them at least bringing that very beginning of that episode to be connected together. I could see that happening. It's an interesting possibility, and I it also brings into the question, I guess, to the degree of how Luthen affects the Rebels world that we know of, because he's not a player in Star Wars Rebels, but he presumably should have some major influence on the Yavin cells and should do things with the partisans and all that. I don't know that's I don't know what if Luthen will stay disconnected, if he'll still be that coward that he describes himself as, and not necessarily be like a leader of sorts, more like a financer, more like a shadowy figure putting strings behind. But yeah, there's some things there that you know, no matter what we speculate on, that stuff is just way too vague for us to really nail down. I will say though, I think we're gonna finally see Bail Organa. I think pretty early on. I think that will give Mon Mothma, after her family leaves, a little bit more courage, a little bit more fortitude, a little bit more direction towards becoming that true rebel, especially as she finds out about the Fulcrum stuff and all that. I think that'd be a pretty good way for her to start splitting from Luton pretty directly, having someone who's doing all the things that Luton is, but with morals intact for the most part. Um, and then I think that'll also bring into question, how they view Saw. I think we're going to see Saw Gerrera do something pretty crazy to get the Rebels upset, maybe more midway through the season, because he is pretty cool with them in Rebels the first time we see them. But then the next time we see him, no, no bueno. Mon Mothma is very against him. Everyone is very against him. So I'd love to see that story explored. And I'd love to see him become the crazy man that Forrest Whitaker portrays him as in Rogue One. So I think that'd be pretty interesting.
Yeah, looking at Mon Mothma's storyline is where I have the hardest time speculating on the time jump. I feel like the richest thing to do with Mon Mothma and what might tie most closely with season one is for the first, even if it's the one episode, but I feel like there needs to be some type of epilogue episode, and it needs to propel her in the direction she's going to be feeling for the rest of the show. It's I really want more Genevieve O'Reilly because she's been fantastic as Mon, and I would like to see her kind of be the point of call once we get past her speech in Rebels, once we get past her speech about the Gorman massacre. I'd like to see her be kind of this person who's involved with the rebellion. We see the rebel fleet, or we go maybe to the planet that they're on in season 3 of Rebels, and we keep connecting with that group, and we know it's that group, but we never see. This show is I highly doubt ever going to give us any cameos from Rebels or Ahsoka or anyone. It's going to be Mon Mothma and maybe Bail Organa, and they're going to be the players that are going to be from that camp who are going to be like meeting. And I think if Luthen is affiliated at all with the rebellion, it's going to be as some type of special operative, somebody who's doing the dirty work that we obviously don't see in a children's animated TV show like Rebels. It's going to be that behind the scenes, seedy assassination type work. It's going to be working with the partisans. It's going to be infiltrating and spying. It's going to be all of those things that we didn't yet see. The darker side that Rogue One has portrayed of the rebellion, that Rebels would make you think that doesn't really exist. And if you watch the original trilogy, the rebellion is so good and happy and fighting for freedom, but then Rogue One really makes it a real true war. It's a war that obviously every time in war there's no perfect scenario. Everything is gray, and you have to make the decision that works best for the ideals you're fighting for. And I think that's going to be Luthen and Cassian, and ultimately all of the more extreme parts of the rebellion. I feel like a Draven, I would love to see a Draven work directly with Cassian and Luthen, but I also feel like he's going to be somebody who is assigned to them by Amon Mothma once she is now firmly one of the rebel leaders. And I can kind of see this whole show going that way for maybe the first episode or the first 2 episodes, maybe even the first 4 episodes are the epilogue. I don't think they're going to go with a full 4 if it's an epilogue, but I do think we need to start semi close, at least with Mon Mothma, to get a nice rounded story back into where she is going to have less screen time, because ultimately she is, because we know her story. So they are going to have to shift at least halfway through the season to her not really being a player, other than being kind of the person that's like, you guys need to go do this. But I think having Draven intermixed with that would be a nice extension of Mon Mothma. I do think we're going to get Bail Organa in the show. I think we have to get Bail Organa in the show at some point, even though he has been kind of shifted in his role a little bit, especially with his heavy involvement in the beginning of the first couple more kid-friendly seasons of Rebels as kind of the idyllic version of the rebellion that we see so much in the original trilogy. He's kind of the face of that, where Mon is, because of her involvement in Rogue One, more specifically with a Draven or a Cassian, and giving those orders to kill Galen or so. She's a little bit more in the CD realm, and she's working with the Bothan spies and Return of the Jedi. She's part of the more military side, where Bail seems to be more of the hero side. I'd like to see him get his hands dirty, but I think their dynamic could be different, and I'd like to see both of those things juxtaposed. But I think Cassian mostly the way the show is going to progress, it's going to give us both exciting moments in time for the rebellion, times when the rebellion itself shifts a lot, because I think Cassian's kind of at the point where he doesn't really change much as a character. He's somebody who I think is going to grow more attached to the cause he's fighting for and grow more attached to the people and the ideals he's fighting for and with. But I don't think he's going to personally have any major character arcs next season. I think he's somebody who might learn things as each arc wraps up, or somebody who learns to accept things or to fight against things or believe in things differently. But I don't think he's going to really change at the core of who he is. I think who he is at the beginning of the show, honestly, is similar to who he is at the end of season one. It's just more of a solidified, directed version of that rather than someone who's floundering for existence and a place to go in the galaxy has now found it. I think that's what we're going to solidify in the next season. But like you said, I think the third arc could be a Saw Gerrera arc. It's going to be stuff like that. It's going to be arcs that add things that we know from Rogue One, add things that we know of this time period, and give us why that happened. And ultimately, probably the last or second to last arc will be the K2SO one that gets us close to that comic and hopefully doesn't completely contradict it, but has some elements of it and ultimately pushes them on to their first adventure together. I'd like to see it, all of that. And ultimately, I think next season will be pretty interesting for the Rebellion side. Now, to flip to the Imperial side, which I think is far more open ended to talk about, because obviously our main Imperial characters, none of them we know from anything else. So they will all be open season, really. They could all die, they could all live throughout this whole season. Their dynamics and their trajectory for their character arcs is completely wide open, and we don't really know how they're going to be set up as opposition for Luthen and Cassian and their whole group of rebels that we are expecting to see next season. So, like, what are your thoughts on how the Empire and our bad guys, kind of, for lack of a better word, are going to be used for next season?
Yeah, I think it'll be a pretty interesting inverse to how they were treated in this first season, where, they are the structure, they are the face of a behemoth that's closing all the leaks, as Nemec says. That they're so insecure that they have to close everything, control, control, control. But now the villains, I think, will be personal, right? I think they'll be coming for the Axis, the Luthen, right? They're going to come for our Cassians. They're gonna come for a Bix even or something like that. Like they're gonna do things that I think will try to affect the morale of Cassian and put him more and more into that prison where he's gonna make very difficult and hard choices. Um, but I don't really see them grow bigger, because I don't if they become bigger than they are position wise or influence wise, then they start butting in with people in like Rogue One, like a Krennic or a Grand Moff or the people on Scarif and all that. That I think they're always meant to be personal, and this was their biggest defeat in season one. Ferrex was hugely horrible. Like, yeah, Aldani is probably objectively worse for the Empire, but for these people, this is way worse because they were in it, they were hurt, they were affected by it. A lot of their comrades and friends died. So I see Cassian being like the most wanted man, right? I'd love to see Dedra just chase out of spite and all these other things. But I think an interesting angle would be, I think a pretty interesting angle would also be to re-elevate Blevin's character. It was pretty interesting to see that, he's been working with the chauffeur and keeping tabs on the Coruscant politics. I think that's more of his realm. But Dedra has taken his storm, right? Has taken over everything that he's done and been more successful till the finale, and then everything goes wrong for her. So I could see him reassert power. I love to see that power struggle that was a little bit more of a tug of war become an all-out war between them in season two. I think that's where a lot of my early predictions with Cyril being like the wild dog used by Dedra could become a little bit more obvious. I'd love to see her eliminate her competition become more and more of like a tooth and nail sort of fighter instead of, you know, this character who wants things to be picturesque. You know, she wants to capture Cassie, and she doesn't want snipers like she does in this episode. She wants to act quickly, but low key at the same time without an escort. I think she'll become more and more desperate, and that's where a serial becomes her playful toy. And I think his devotion to her will at first be a pretty mutual decision, like, hey, like I'll do everything for you, tell me what to do, or proposing ideas to her to help her out. Maybe he becomes an Imperial himself, but I think he'd be more effective as like her off the book sort of agent. And then over time, I'd like to see him maybe butt up against her and then her kind of dispose of him, use him for her own desires, her own fascist dreams of control and power and victory, both personal and professionally. I think that's where maybe more of a mid to late season story will go with her and Ciro. But yeah, I don't know if she's gonna be someone who like directly fights against a rebel cell and all that. I don't think the effects of the first season will be to keep her at that same level. I think she's not gonna necessarily be demoted, but she's gonna have to pick and choose her battles a lot more carefully this time around. Um, Other than them, Imperial wise, I mean, there really isn't anyone else. I don't think the ISB will be as big of a player. I think it's really just going to be like a background for her own machinations. And she's going to become increasingly more like the person that she's brought into the ISB to be the person to create these changes. And Ferrix is going to prove that, hey, she caused so much more problems. So they're going to push back against her. But she's going to double down on who she is and trust her gut and make use of Cyril. I think that's really the only thing I can say about the villains other than Blevins and perhaps whoever else gets introduced. Maybe the Major becomes a bit more of an antagonist for her, but I'm not sure.
These are more characters where the structure of the jumping around just seems out of place for the arcs of these characters. It's one of the reasons why it was kind of more in the realm of predicting the future for more Cyril than anybody, being that they die in season one, but they both make it out and they're obviously being paired to be part of the same group. And I think they will definitely be that constant antagonist for Luthen and kind of the opposite side of the coin. They will be like a special ops division that is always going after these rebel strikes and these rebel insurgents and making sure that they can try to contain and suffocate the different fires that Luthen and Cassian are starting throughout the galaxy. But in terms of character, we see both of them. Cyril more go through an arc in this season to be somebody who is, frozen in fear the first time he's part of a battle, to jumping in and rescuing Dedra and actually trying to get involved and reaffirm his beliefs, get himself back in the fold, prove that he is worthy of law and being the person that he wants to be. That's kind of the arc he goes through by the end of the season. And ultimately I think they will be that flip side, that constant antagonist for our main rebel group. It's just how they're utilized in next season that I find interesting. Are we going to get a lot of their perspective again, or is it going to be more villainous? This show as a whole, the style of what we're doing next season is much more reminiscent of something like Rebels, where we have all these mini arcs, or you have these episodes that jump so far in time from each other. And in those types of shows, obviously, you can't devote all of your time, all your runtime to all of these different characters like we did in this season, where we had 5, 6 main characters who all got screen time every single episode. There's going to have to be some arcs that are simplified or cut just in general to fit all this stuff and to fit the time jumps. And I think that the villains here could be what we ultimately simplify. There's also the tag, and I think this will lead us into our Rogue One part. There's the tag of the Death Star, which obviously indicates a future appearance by a Orson Krennic, for example, maybe a Tarkin. There are characters that we could see that ultimately connect to the Empire. So are Dedra and Cyril going to be used more so in the vein of our connective tissue to the Imperial side of Rogue One, or are they going to be used as those pure antagonists for our characters specifically? This show is so character driven, so dialogue driven, that it would seem like it would stray away from the identity of the show if season two was completely just like rebel perspective, them going on missions, and then we've got these villains kind of like a Callus and Rebels who are just always there but always defeated by our main characters, and ultimately left just to be kind of that heel. I don't think that the show's going in that direction, but the way they're going to marry the ISB and the connections between Dedra's part of the ISB with the Death Star and what ultimately is the buildup towards Rogue One, it's going to be fascinating to see how they do that. And I do think Jaloran is in Catalyst, and the ISB is a big part of the galaxy in general. Obviously, Jaloran is one of the people on the Death Star as well. In Episode 4, there are going to be connection between ISB and the Death Star. Maybe Dedra is one of the people who's recommended to be part of kind of the anti-spy group that is trying to stop those people who are finding out about the Death Star. And that brings us into Krennic, because I would be shocked if Krennic does not show up in the show. I would be completely shocked. But anyway, let's talk about some of those Rogue One's connections. So I already mentioned Krennic and I mentioned Tarkin. We've talked about Saw Gerrera already, and then Mon Mothma's connection to Rogue One, as well as General Draven already, and Bail Organa. So there's a lot of Rogue One pieces in here. So, Sanak, do you have any other connections to Rogue One that you would like to see in season two, or some of the characters that I just talked about, or the way you would like to see them used?
Yeah, I mean, I guess to go back to Forrest Whitaker, I mean, I think this man's about to deliver a masterclass next season. I think he'll be the the most attractive rebel for audiences in a sense, because Luthen, while he's not necessarily a rebel in the season, he is that mysterious, foreboding character. He is magnetic every time we see him on screen, and the only time he really had an equal on screen, I mean, Genevieve O'Reilly is great or not, but in terms of effect, in terms of storyline, in terms of plot, in terms of impact on plot, yeah, I think Forrest Whitaker's scene as Saw Gerrera this season was the only time I ever saw Stellan's Luthen ever meet an equal, and I think we're gonna see, like I said before, a little bit more of what happens between those two different batches of episodes in Rebels, where he goes from, man, nice to see you again, Rex. Great working on this Geonosis mission, to, I'm stealing this Kyber crystal. Crazy things are going on. Screw you, the rest of the Rebels. You guys are all wrong. I'm doing the right way. Call me a terrorist. I don't care. I just know what I'm doing is right. Um, all that's wonderful, but I think we need to see the full paranoia, the man with the leg blown off, with the walking stick, the guy who's willing to just die. I don't think we see that in Rebels yet. Even in this last episode, I don't think we see that for the first half of the second season. I think that's more of like a final arc where Cassian is the one who's, we kind of get rid of all the other supporting characters that are original to Andor and become more focused on maybe creating a mini movie, a feature, or like a special presentation essentially of all of the characters leading into Rogue One. And I think Saw Gerrera's paranoia and all that stuff happening to him would be a pretty interesting thing to see as like a final act of sorts, to kind of justify a little bit more his placement in Rogue One. He definitely was the character who we know was had a lot of reshoots and shuffled around. Literally, his hair changed because of reshoots and all these other things. We can't bring a Jyn Erso, unfortunately. I don't think, as much as we love Felicity, I don't think she could fit into this unless maybe she has like a cameo scene. I'd love if they can find a story or reason for her to appear again. She can't meet with the partisans, obviously, but she can't meet with the rebels on Yavin either. But if she can maybe meet with some more complicated rebels and brush pats with them, maybe we get to see a little bit more where she's going, where she's going to become, essentially, because she's the one who I think feels the most paper thin development wise and change wise. I'd love to see a little bit more growth for her there. But the character that I really want to see the most is Bodhi Rook, because and of course Galen Urso if we can manage to get Mickelson back in as well. But really, I mean, that whole dynamic, he believes in the cause. He's just a regular freighter guy, and he believes that he can do something to change the galaxy for the good, to help people out. And he has such a strong motivation, but we only get that from Riz Ahmed telling us desperately that in his frenetic way. We don't really see it. And apparently there were cut scenes, at least storyboarded, but possibly even shot, showcasing those early moments before he's entrusted with the mission. I'd love to see them reshot. I don't know if being reused would make sense, especially with how Andor is really reshaping how we think about Rogue One. So Riz Ahmed, please come back, reshoot some scenes with Lars, and I'd love to see all that put together and fitting into this Andor storyline. Um, yeah, I don't. I mean, I guess what becomes complicated here with Rogue One is that even if I find flaws with a lot of the characterizations, there's only so much you can do with like the smaller supporting characters. There's only so much you can do with the Jyn Erso. It's really just the people around her that are the core group that you can do something with. Maybe we get to see a little bit more of like the Kyber crystal stuff become a bit more of an impact in the story, especially with how there's a whole episode dedicated in Rebels. We get to maybe see a Jeddah, a little bit more closer. We get to see the partisans relocate to Jeddah, maybe see why they're in exile in Jeddah essentially from everyone else. The effect of the Empire, a little bit more just overt Death Star stuff. I'd love to see. I haven't read Catalyst, but I'm assuming from things that I have read about it, maybe a little bit more of these indirect confrontations between a Tarkin and a Krennic. Add in like another harshly typed email from Krennic and then a sassy email back from Tarkin, but see what they're doing with their own respective groups before they come together. I'd love to see that. And I'd also love to see Krennic be competent. I think Rogue One does him a disservice. He's just more angry and stumbling and upset. I'd love to see him be the one in control, be the one who's really like the mysterious figure as described in Lost Stars. I'd love to see that characterization kind of come more fully to life. But regardless, all those characters that are essential to Rogue One kind of have to be that final film, those final 4 episodes.
Yeah, the Rogue One connections are so tough to predict because there's such a large cast of characters there. I don't think we'll see any of Jyn Erso. I think both the fact that she was 16 when Saw left her just doesn't fit in this timeline unless she just randomly showed up in a scene, which the show doesn't seem to go for some of the fan service moments that even like Rogue One does go for a lot of times. So I don't see her. And I would love to see Galen, but I also don't know where that fits in with this narrative. Like this, like reiterating, this season was so character driven and so focused that we'd have to really expand not just the cast, but also the scope of the show to show everybody. And the Death Star is a pretty big, expansive scope, and you don't tease that at the end of season 1 without it being a centerpiece of season 2. But I think Krennic is our best bet for an Imperial. I do think we'll see Tarkin at some point in at least a couple scenes. I don't think Tarkin will be a mainstay in the show, but I think Krennic could be a solid mainstay throughout this entire season. I think a lot of what will be set up, obviously, by showing the Death Star as our really only tease towards season 2, it's indicating that the Death Star is the backbone of a lot of what we do in season 2. And that would make sense, obviously, leading towards Rogue One, where at the beginning, Cassian has that obviously strong suspicion and he's heard many rumors about the Death Star. But this spy that he meets on Catherine is the person who confirms it for him. And then he kills this guy, and that sets us on our mission. So how much are we going to sacrifice what has been the shape of the narrative and the character structure and the way this is all set up and the political thriller type vibe for general Star Wars world building and Star Wars connection? I find that to be the biggest question when we look at this show. But I do think a really strong candidate would be Krennic. I do think Galen Erso is also a very strong candidate. There's a lot of time to play there with Galen, where he and Krennic, we don't really know what their role is together there, so we can work with that. I think Saw, the way I see this whole thing starting with Saw and starting with Luthen and Cassian as well is them being kind of the bridge between the rebellion and Saw. I think because Saw is one of the more active groups, and Luthen now, maybe that era of cowardice has been lifted now that he has somebody like a Cassian. Now that he has actual operatives who he can work with and trust, and see how he can put himself out there through people with Vel, Cinta, and then Cassian now. He could get involved with some missions with the partisans and with Saw that ultimately then connect back to the rebellion, and maybe he's that bridge between the two before the eventual break. I could see that being the way they use those characters, and it would be awesome to see Jeddah too. I just like that, and that makes me even want more Guardians of the Will stuff. And there's so much, there's so many things from Rogue One that are such great pieces of hinting at other things we could do in Star Wars that ultimately, like 2 seasons just ultimately doesn't seem like enough for, and that's where it's so hard to speculate. But I would love to see all of that stuff. And Bodhi is somebody who I would love to see, but that would ultimately probably be the final arc of the show, because he's somebody who's has his heart turned over time by Galen, but I don't think it's over time meaning like 4 years. It seems to me from the context of that show, of the movie, that it's like over weeks or a month or maybe even a year, where he and Galen are confiding in each other. But I don't know. That would be another great character to add. But I think the way we see season one reach for the Melchis and the characters like that, this is a show that really, really wants to flesh out Rogue One. It's not a show that just is featuring a character from Rogue One. It really wants to do the groundwork of building Rogue One into a finale. And ultimately, season two might not even have a big explosive finale, because it wants us to treat Rogue One as its finale. And I think the fact that we got a character as small as Melshi in season one bodes well for all of the Rogue One connections that we could be getting. And hopefully that doesn't really impact or hinder what has been the driving force behind season one, which is the characters and the intermixing of the political tension between all these characters. Because I love the different dimensions this show has given us. I don't want it to sacrifice those elements for just Rogue One building and Rogue One teasing. Like we know what Rogue One is, and we know a lot of the context around Rogue One from books and other shows. We don't need to completely just fill everything in here. Like, let's stick to the Cassian group and then build out around it what is necessary. And I think they will do that, because the show has been it's had opportunities to throw in a Bail Organa or a Palpatine. I would actually like to see a Palpatine in a scene, or at least like as a hologram or on TV or something, because I feel like the Emperor's presence has been so absent from a lot of the stuff we've done with this time period, especially in a show like this, which is giving us a lot more Imperial perspective than we've ever really seen from this time period in TV. I'd like to see how Palpatine's influence and the propaganda around a Palpatine at this time is used. I would also like to add that, but ultimately I think we're in for something special when it comes to Rogue One and Rogue One fans, and kind of this whole era being built out in season two. But those are our thoughts on our season two predictions and speculation. Thank you all so much for watching. Let us know down below what you think could happen in season two of Andor. There's obviously, we've gone on for a long time talking here. There's a lot to talk about for possible season two, especially with all the time jumps. So let us know what you think are strong possibilities down below, maybe some of the characters you want to see. Give us all of that in the comments below. We always respond to all of your comments. Like the video if you haven't so far, and then subscribe to our channel for continued Star Wars content. We try to give you guys the best Star Wars content on the internet, so subscribing is the best way to show your support for us and our channel, and tell us you want to see more. Like I said at the beginning of the video, we are switching back to our 2-video-a-week schedule for pretty much all of December. until the Bad Batch starts, and we will be making schedule changes again as we progress here into the future. We're going to have Bad Batch and ultimately Bad Batch and Mandalorian at the same time next year, so there's going to be a lot of shifts in the way we're doing things here on the channel, but December and the rest of the year will fill out how we usually do it, with 2 videos a week. Specials on Monday, where each one of us will do videos alternating weeks, and then Friday we will have joint videos and anything like that for our tier lists and other recurring series we have coming up there on Fridays. So make sure you stick with our channel throughout even the non Disney Plus show times of the year for Star Wars. We do have a lot of great content coming out for all of you. So make sure to keep watching. Check out our High Republic Convergence video that came out on Monday, as well as our review for episode 12 if you have not checked out our finale review for Andor. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.